Chapter 11 of The Adventures of Tommy Blake by Brother Ernest Ryan. This Librivox Recording is in the public domain. Counterplot. In spite of Tommy's determination the night before to be wide awake early in the morning, nature would not be cheated, and he was lost in the soundest of sleep long after the sun had flooded his room. There was still a cool breeze blowing in through the windows, and the fresh quietness of the place was enough to prolong anyone's morning slumber. Then, too, the strain of the night before had taken its toll of the boy's energy. Tommy's face was its normal color once more. No longer were the cheeks crimson with the flush of fever. His thick black curly hair, which, through years of good home training and then by the compulsion of the school law, was always well combed, was now in a riot. The full sweep of his chest as it rose and fell bespoke the vigor of health which was naturally his. He had the fine athletic build which is the pride of the healthy young American boy. Just how long sleep would have held him might never be known, had not a wren, entirely ignorant of the fact that others were not such early birds, alighted on the window near his bed and set up such a chatter regarding his domestic problems that it was impossible for Tommy to remain asleep. He looked about quickly, then reached for his watch. It was already 9 o'clock. He listened for sounds from below that would betray activity there, but everything was quiet. Then the happenings of the night before trooped back into his mind, and he resolved to sum up what he knew in as orderly a manner as possible. Someone was being held in the house in anticipation of the day of his death. That person had money, and up to the present time had made no will. The men who were in charge of him were determined to get what they could from him. There was the problem. But who was a sick man, and would Tommy be able to do anything to help him? At this point he heard the sound of footsteps on the stairs leading up to his room. A moment later the key turned in the lock, and Charlie entered. "How do you feel today?" "Just fine, sir." "You certainly are a sleeper." "I am really ashamed of myself, sir. I had planned to be up real early this morning." "Well, it's early enough. I have not been up very long myself. But get up now and dress, and as soon as you are ready come downstairs. We'll have breakfast together this morning." This time when Charlie left the room he did not lock the door after him, so Tommy knew that at last he was going to get to see more of this beautiful summer home. It did not take him long to wash and dress, and he soon opened the door of his room to step out into a spacious corridor which gave access to a broad flight of highly polished stairs. Heavy drapes covered the windows of the luxurious reception room into which the stairs descended. A beautiful electric chandelier illuminated the room with a mellow light. The moment Tommy reached the bottom of the stairs, a door opened and the voice of Charlie broke upon the silence. "This way, Tommy," he whispered. Tommy turned in the direction of the voice. "Don't forget to speak in low tones. My patient is still asleep." Tommy stepped into the dining room of this beautiful home. Everything spoke of wealth and comfort. There was a heavy velvet Brussels rug on the floor. Some large oil paintings of scenes and still life ornamented the walls above the rich, heavy paneling. The long drapes at the windows were drawn back, permitting the sun to brighten the room. The windows were open, and the cool morning air gave the last touch of pleasant freshness to the scene. The breakfast table was tastefully set. Indeed, one could not but think that a woman's hand was noticeable throughout the room, and yet no woman appeared. The coffee in the electric percolator gave off its delicious aroma. Pieces of crisp brown toast showed in the toaster, whose silver edges glittered pink from the heated coils within. A large glass bowl of different kinds of fruit stood in the center of the table, and at each of the 2 places set for breakfast steamed a bowl of oatmeal. Everything was there to make one be thankful for a good appetite. "Sit down there, Tommy." "Thank you, sir." There were long moments of silence. "Just because I told you to talk in a low voice, Tommy, is no reason why you should keep still altogether. Of course, everything is strange to you here." He ate for a moment thoughtfully. "You know, I can't quite figure out why it is that you are not satisfied with the Academy and the villa. I have known both of those places for a very long time. Kensington is an old friend of mine, and I have been over to the villa a lot of times." "Well, I just don't like it," replied Tom. "In the first place, when a fellow is born a Catholic, he wants to be able to go to church on Sundays at least. I have not been able to go since I left home." I know, Tommy, but your father is not a Catholic. He never wanted you to be one either. You ought to try to see his point of view." "What church do you go to, sir?" "Me? Well, I don't go to any. I don't believe much in going to church." "Is that why you are a friend of my father's?" "Not entirely. Listen, Tommy, why do you think you must go to church on Sunday?" "When God the Father gave Moses the Ten Commandments, one of them was, 'Remember thou keep holy the Sabbath day.' When Christ came on this earth and founded His Church, He gave His apostles the power to make regulations to carry out His work. One of the regulations that was made was that Catholics must attend Mass on Sunday. That's the reason why I want to go. When I do that, I am doing what is pleasing to God." "I see. And you really believe that?" "Yes, sir." "That's very interesting. You know, Tommy, I don't know anything about these things. I never had any training in religion. Perhaps if I had, things would be different with me now." Just then the telephone bell rang. The instrument was on a small table near at hand, and Charlie reached for it while he remained seated at the table. Without raising his voice above the rather hoarse whisper he had been using in talking to Tommy, he answered it. Tommy went on with his breakfast, pretending that he was not at all interested in the conversation, but in reality paying the very closest attention to it. "Yes. About the same. Yes, I can. Within a half hour. Well, I wouldn't worry about that. Nothing will interfere. I have someone taking care of all the correspondence. Yes, tell him to answer it. No, don't bother with that, for I'll take him back there today. Yes. I'll be seeing you." Only a single part of this one-sided and obscure conversation interested Tommy, and that was the sentence, "I'll take him back there today." He knew what that meant. Charlie again resumed his meal, eating for a while in silence. No doubt he was reviewing in his mind the things he had been talking about over the wire. Then he became once more aware of the boy sitting across from him. "How's the breakfast, Tommy?" "Just fine, sir." "Don't call me sir. Call me Charlie." "Okay, Charlie." "We haven't had much chance to become friends, I know, but I never like to hear one refer to me in any other way but as Charlie. I've been called that ever since I can remember anything." For a moment or two after that, Tommy believed that he might be able to learn to like the man who sat across from him. But his thoughts were soon taken up with other things: anxiety about the unseen invalid, and unhappiness at the prospect of returning to the villa. Charlie pushed his chair back a little from the table and seemed lost in thought. Then he turned to address Tommy, who by now had finished his breakfast. "I'm going to have to go away from here for a couple hours, Tommy. I had planned on taking you back to the villa the first thing this morning, but that's off until I return. You won't be afraid to stay here alone for a while, will you?" "No, Charlie, I'm not afraid." "That's fine. Now in here, Tommy," he continued, opening a new door, "is the library. Come in. You're a student and you'll love these books." Tommy stepped into a beautiful room whose walls were entirely surrounded with built-in bookcases. "I'll hurry off now, Tommy, but I'll be back at about noon. There are just a few things I will expect of you. I'll reduce them all to this: no matter who comes while I'm gone, you are not to let them in." Tommy noticed that Charlie's eyes were now hard, and if a while ago he had felt he could be friends with this man, the thought was far from him now. "But how will I know when you come back? You are going in your auto, aren't you?" "I'll give 3 short honks on my horn. That will be a signal for you. Until you hear that, don't even stand at the windows where anyone could see you. I'll be back in a couple of hours." Charlie put on his hat and left the house. Through the library window Tommy could see him go out to the garage, which was about 50 feet away. In a short time he heard the sound of the motor, and before long the car passed entirely out of his view. Now Tommy was free to work out his plot. The books in the library did not interest him, for he had made up his mind to explore the house. He might be able to find the room in which the sick man was kept, and if he could do so, he ought certainly to discover other things of interest also. 2 of the rooms besides those he had been in on the first floor were locked. He knocked on their doors, but got no response. Then he went upstairs. The door of the room in which he had slept was ajar, just as he had left it, but the 3 other doors on that floor were locked. He heard not a sound as, after knocking, he listened carefully at each of them. Where could the sick man be? Was he so sound asleep that he did not hear, or was he too sick to respond? Tommy went downstairs again and out to explore the garage, whose door Charlie had left open. He found that it was very roomy and built entirely of thick logs and stone on the same plan as that of the house. However, to his surprise, there were no windows in it. Then he reflected that, while the absence of windows would have been rather unusual in a city garage, out here in the country, where people use their places only in the summer months, it might be quite natural to have it built thus. For instance, it would remove from tramps and vandals the temptation to break windows. Tommy was very happy when he found that the walls of the garage were so solid. That was the first important thing in the plan that he was now making. He left the door standing open, just as he had found it, and after a look at the padlock, went back into the house. He would wait and trap Charlie. Now, for a time, he could give his attention to the splendid library. He found many books that he had read, and hundreds more that he had never so much as heard of. He took down a volume of Poe's stories, and then went over to a large chair beside a reading table. There were many curious objects on the table, interesting little ivory figures carved in the minutest detail. It was plain that the owner of this place had a taste for fine Chinese and Japanese curios. After Tommy had examined them carefully, he sat down to read, but he found it difficult to keep his mind on the printed page. At last he put his book down. There were other things to examine in that spacious library. In one corner stood a beautifully hand-carved cabinet. He went over to it, opened one of the doors, and found that it contained numerous packs of playing cards. Examining some of them, he noticed that they too were of Japanese design, many of them entirely unfamiliar to him. No doubt they were part of the curio collection of the owner of the home. Near this cabinet Tommy found a radio. He turned the dial on it and waited, but no sound came out of it. Searching for the cause of its failure to function, he soon discovered that it was not even wired. It had never been used. That was a disappointment to him. It would have been a good method of whiling away some of the morning. He next found a stamp collection which immediately absorbed him, for he himself had begun a collection about a year ago. He took the heavy book and went over to the table again. He found among the stamps many specimens like those he himself had had back in his father's home. He wondered what had become of the things he had left behind him on the night he and his mother had made their escape. So much had happened since then. Would he ever go back to that home? Tommy looked at his watch. More than an hour had passed since Charlie left. Where had he gone? Charlie was a strange creature. Perhaps he had not gone very far at all. He might only be trying Tommy out to see what he would do. These thoughts made Tommy lose interest in the stamps. He was closing up the big book when his sleeve caught on the knob of a drawer in the table, a drawer not entirely closed. Tommy took hold of both of the knobs and pulled. The drawer came out, revealing to his gaze 2 revolvers. Here was something interesting and very appropriate to his plan. How quickly that thought came to him! Here were 2 well-kept weapons, and both of them were loaded. Tommy had had little experience in the use of revolvers, but he had owned a rifle and knew how to handle it. He would take a chance. Charlie must be caught some way. Then it all came to him clearly. He would wait in the house near the window which gave a view of the drive down which Charlie had gone that morning. As soon as he heard the signal Charlie had promised, he would come out on the porch. Such an action would be perfectly correct, for he had been given no order to stay in the house when Charlie came back. But there were other things to consider. If Charlie stopped his car near the front of the house, nothing could be done to capture him, and in that case Tommy might be caught with a revolver. "He can't do anything to me if he does catch me with it," Tommy said to himself. Suddenly the boy heard the sound of the returning automobile. He quickly pushed the revolver into his pocket, shoving his coat around to conceal the part of the weapon that projected. As the car drew near he heard the signal agreed on and hurried to the door. After the car had gone by on its way to the garage, Tommy opened the door and went out onto the porch to watch. To his delight, he observed that Charlie was going to drive right into the garage without stopping. That was just what he wanted. He ran as fast as he could, seized the garage door in his hands, pushed it into its place, and before Charlie could realize what was happening, had the door padlocked securely with Charlie on the inside and himself on the outside. Now some fast work had to be done. Tommy hurried back into the house, got the telephone directory, and called the chief of police in the town. "Bring several policemen with you and come as fast as you can. There's a man here, locked up in a garage. He's been planning to rob someone. I can't tell you all about it now, but you will find plenty when you get here. I'm all alone here, Chief, so don't keep me waiting." End of chapter 11.